A Tale of Two Sinbads, retold by Ian Wybrow, illustrated by Shahab Shamshirsaz. Chapter 1. Sinbad the Sailor Returns Home. The city of Baghdad was just beginning to wake. The river sparkled in the morning light as the sun rose. A tall, handsome man stood alone on the deck of a sailing ship, admiring what he saw. He had been away travelling for 3 long years and had had many adventures. At last he was back in the city where he was born. This man was Sinbad the Sailor, one of the richest and most famous travellers in the world. But you would not have known it to look at him. When he went away, a great crowd of people had come to wave him goodbye. But now there was nobody to welcome him home. "Nobody knows I'm here," he told himself. "Everyone thinks I'm dead, or that I've gone away forever." He ran his fingers through his bushy beard and looked down at his dirty clothes. "I need to go home, have a bath and change into clean clothes," he thought. Suddenly, he had an idea. What fun it would be to keep secret the fact that he was alive. He could wander the streets like a stranger. Perhaps he would find out if anyone still remembered him. He walked slowly through the quiet, narrow streets and the empty marketplace. But the peace and quiet didn't last. It was not long before babies woke up and started crying. Then donkeys began to bray. More and more people began to get out of bed and throw open their doors. Soon carts were rumbling past, and the smell of baking bread filled the air. Sinbad's tummy rumbled almost as loudly as the carts. He needed a good breakfast. It was then that he remembered that he didn't have any money. He did have a bag of diamonds hidden under his shirt, but he couldn't use diamonds to buy breakfast. What was he going to do? Chapter 2. Two Sinbads. As Sinbad walked along feeling hungry, he saw a boy dressed in rags. The boy was sitting on a wall, drinking a bowl of milk. Sinbad could not stop himself licking his lips.
"What are you staring at?"
said the boy, feeling rather frightened. "Forgive me, young sir," said Sinbad. "I've just arrived in the city, and I haven't had my breakfast yet."
"Why don't you buy yourself something to eat?"
said the boy. "I have no money," answered Sinbad.
"Times are hard, stranger,"
said the boy.
"I can't find work myself, so I know what it is to be hungry. You can have some of this if you like."
He offered Sinbad his bowl of milk. "Thank you, that's very kind of you. I'll just have a sip," said Sinbad. "Do you mind if I sit on the wall for a moment?" The boy agreed. Sinbad sat down and they began to chat. "What's your name?" asked Sinbad. The boy told him. Sinbad opened his eyes wide with surprise. The boy's name was Sinbad too. Sinbad wasn't ready to give away his name yet. "You can call me Ahmed," he replied.
"Of course. I'm not the famous Sinbad,"
said the boy, seeing the surprised look on the stranger's face.
"Sinbad the Sailor used to live here in the city, in a house as big as a palace. Everyone liked him. He was always building and buying and selling and finding work for people to do, even poor people like me. Everyone talked about his amazing travels and adventures. We all loved hearing about them, even if they weren't true. But now he's gone, nobody knows where. Maybe he won't ever come back."
"So you don't believe the stories about his adventures?" Sinbad asked.
"No, I don't. I don't believe in giants or sea monsters. I don't believe that he was once carried away by an enormous bird called a roc. People say that the roc was so big that it laid eggs the size of an island,"
laughed young Sinbad.
"And people also say he was always giving diamonds to the poor. I can believe that he would give away a few coins, but why would a rich man give diamonds to beggars?"
Said Sinbad with a twinkle in his eye. "I know a good story about Sinbad the Sailor. Would you like to hear it?"
"Oh yes, Ahmed. I like a good story,"
replied young Sinbad.
"But first, Have another drink of milk."
Sinbad started to tell the story of how 3 years ago he had left his comfortable home in Baghdad and bought a splendid ship, gathered a crew to sail it, and set out to look for treasure in unknown lands. The boy listened quietly as the story began. The story of Sinbad. For several weeks at sea, Sinbad had bad luck. Sometimes there was no wind and the boat couldn't move at all. Sometimes they ran out of water and the crew fell ill. Sometimes they nearly froze in snow and ice. At last they sailed into warm blue waters again. But all of a sudden, a great storm blew up. The ship was blown onto some rocks at the end of a little island. Luckily, the storm went away just as quickly as it had started, and Sinbad and his crew began to repair their ship. Then they tried to drag it back into the water. Before they could float the ship again, they noticed some people coming towards them. Sinbad and his crew got ready to fight, but then they saw that the islanders had no weapons. It seemed that they had been hiding in the forest, and now they had come down to the beach to welcome the sailors with fresh water and fruit. Sinbad could not help feeling that something was wrong. He did not trust the islanders, although he was very hungry and the fruit looked delicious. He thought that they laughed and smiled too much, and they seemed to be watching the crew, as if they were waiting for something. While his crew filled their tummies, he secretly hid his fruit in his shirt. When nobody was looking, he slipped away up the hill. He hid among some bushes covered in red and yellow peppers. Sinbad peeped through the bushes at the beach far below. He was horrified to see all his men lying on the sand. They weren't moving, and he was not sure whether they were dead or asleep. Perhaps the fruit had been poisoned. Sinbad spent a very sad and miserable night in the pepper bushes. What could he do to save his crew? Chapter 3. Red and Yellow Peppers. At sunrise next morning, Sinbad looked down from his hiding place and was amazed to see that there was no one on the sand below. After a few minutes, he could hear the islanders calling to each other. He decided to go down the hill secretly to find out what was happening. He soon discovered that his crew were now prisoners. Each man had been tied to a tree and left to die, without food or water. He ran down to the shore to look for his ship. It had been dragged off the rocks and back into the water. Now it was far out to sea, sailing away. "Those people weren't islanders at all!" cried Sinbad. "They were pirates!" Quickly he hurried back to the trees and untied his crew. They were glad to see him, but their joy turned to sorrow when they found out that they were trapped on the island with no way of escape. Sinbad kept his men busy. He didn't want them to lose hope. First, he ordered them to look for food. They soon discovered that the only things to eat on the island were the red and yellow peppers growing on the hill where Sinbad had been hiding all night. Now that they had food, Sinbad told his crew to take it in turns to keep a lookout from the top of the hill. Day after day they looked out across the sea, but it was many months before the watching and waiting was rewarded. One afternoon a ship appeared on the horizon. "Ship ahoy!" yelled the lookout. The men on the shore shouted and waved, but the ship sailed on. It was too far away to see them. It was Sinbad himself who had the idea to light a fire. "Come on, men," he shouted. "Gather as much wood as you can find. We need to make a fire." Black smoke soon rose above the trees. The ship changed direction and turned back towards the island. But Sinbad's troubles were not over yet. It soon became clear that the ship was heading for the rocks at the end of the island. Again it was Sinbad who acted. "I must warn them!" he cried. He dived into the waves, his sharp sword between his teeth, and began to swim. There were sharks and sea monsters in the sea, but Sinbad was not afraid. When one of the biggest sea monsters tried to eat him, Sinbad simply cut off 2 of its heads. After that the sharks avoided Sinbad and attacked the monster instead. Sinbad the sailor kept swimming until he reached the ship. "Ahoy there!" he called, to warn the captain about the rocks ahead. Strong arms pulled him on board the ship, and soon Sinbad was helping the captain steer safely towards the shore. The captain explained that he was working for a rich king. The king's favourite food was peppers. He had eaten all the peppers in his kingdom, and the captain had been sent to search for some more. So far they had discovered none. "What luck!" cried Sinbad. "My crew and I can help you fill this whole ship with peppers." Chapter 4. In the Power of the Rich King. So, thanks to Sinbad, he and his crew were rescued from the island. They were taken to the city of the rich king. The king was overjoyed to see so many peppers. He was even more impressed when the captain of the ship told him about Sinbad's courage and cleverness. In fact, the king was so pleased that he held a great feast in Sinbad's honour and invited Sinbad and his crew to join him. He also presented Sinbad with a bag of diamonds. What a pity that the king was so greedy! He ate such a lot of peppers at the feast that he got a terrible pain in his tummy. The king began to shout and scream, "Help! Sinbad has poisoned me!" He ordered his guards to take Sinbad away and lock him up. Once again, Sinbad thought quickly. He hid some bread and his diamonds under his clothes before the guards took him away and locked him in a dark cave. Days passed in darkness, and Sinbad could not think of any way to escape. Then, one day, when his food was almost finished, Sinbad heard the sound of whimpering. He reached out his hand and felt the soft fur of an animal. It was a fox. The poor animal was thin and weak from hunger. "Poor little fox," said Sinbad, "you are in as bad a state as I am." And Sinbad gave the fox his last piece of bread. The fox was grateful, and he licked Sinbad's fingers. Then the fox let Sinbad hold on to his tail and led him along a dark, narrow tunnel. In a little while, Sinbad could see daylight and smell fresh sea air. The fox had shown him a secret way out of the cave. When Sinbad dragged himself out of the tunnel and into the sunshine, he found himself on top of a cliff overlooking the sea. He took the biggest diamond out of his bag and held it up between his finger and thumb so that it caught the sunlight. It flashed and sparkled so brightly that it was seen by a passing fishing boat. The fishermen came to his rescue, and he gave them a few of his diamonds to take him to another country. From there, after many difficulties and after sailing in many different ships, Sinbad was at last able to return to Baghdad, and he still had most of his diamonds. Chapter 5. Enjoy the rest of your milk. When Sinbad the sailor came to the end of his story, he turned to the boy who shared his name and said, "Do tell me, what do you think of that story? Do you believe it?" Again there was a twinkle in his eye. Young Sinbad laughed. He said that he had enjoyed the story very much, although he wasn't sure whether the pirates and the king who loved peppers and the sea monsters really existed.
"But Ahmed, I'll tell you the part I liked best," said young Sinbad. "I enjoyed it when the fox helped Sinbad the sailor get out of the cave. I don't believe any of it, but I wish things happened like that in real life."
"Perhaps your wish will come true, just as Sinbad's did," said the man who called himself Ahmed.
"What do you mean?"
asked young Sinbad. "Well, you were kind enough to share your breakfast with a hungry stranger," said Sinbad the sailor. "Maybe you will get the help that you need." And with that, he stood up, stretched his legs and arms, and gave the bowl back to the boy. There was still a little milk in it. "Now I must go," he said. "Thanks again, and goodbye."
"Wait,"
called the boy as Sinbad walked away.
"Is your name really Ahmed? Where did you come from? How did you hear that story? Who are you?"
"What a lot of questions," Sinbad called back. "Ahmed is just one of my names, but most people call me by your name, Sinbad."
"Sinbad? Ha ha!"
laughed young Sinbad.
"You'll be telling me next that you are the rich and famous Sinbad the sailor. But look at you! You don't look like a rich and famous person."
"Good luck! Enjoy the rest of your milk." With that, Sinbad waved and joined the crowds of people on the street. Young Sinbad waved back. Suddenly he felt sad. What was he to do now? He had no money and no work.
Perhaps I should join a ship and sail away and have some adventures, he thought.
He lifted his bowl to finish his milk. As he did so, he heard something rattle in the bowl. Something hard tapped against his teeth. What could it be? He looked into the bowl and was amazed to see something that sparkled so brightly in the sun that he had to close his eyes. He looked again, and there it was, an enormous diamond.
"Come back!"
young Sinbad yelled, jumping to his feet. He ran as fast as his legs would carry him up the street and round the corner. He didn't stop running until at last he caught up with the tall, handsome man with the bushy beard.
"Sinbad!" he shouted. "Wait! I'm sorry I didn't believe you, but you've dropped this. You must really be Sinbad the sailor after all."
"Hush!" said Sinbad quietly. "This is our secret. You remember the fox in the story, don't you?" Young Sinbad nodded. It was his favourite part of the story. "And the fox wanted to help me, because I was kind to him, didn't he? Well, I agree with him. Kindness should be rewarded. That's why I want to help you. Keep the diamond. It will give you the chance to make a better life for yourself. Good luck." And with that, Sinbad the sailor disappeared into the crowds. A Tale of Two Sinbads. After 3 years of adventures, Sinbad finally returns home. Will anyone recognize him?